Hello, this is Virtualis the Chess Noob, learning and having fun with chess. Some chess games can be exciting, some can be anxiety provoking, some can be puzzling. I would describe the game I played today as smooth, relaxing, and zen. Please enjoy! So let's start with the review. This is chess.com's algorithm, and in this game I played reasonably well with almost 80% accuracy, reasonably even at the beginning, and then after a mistake on my opponent's part, had a commanding lead all the way to the end. And I had some reasonably good moves, a few inaccuracies, but no mistakes or blunders. Let's now have a look at the analysis. So, opponent played white, I played black, and they started with the queen's pawn, d4. I responded with d5. They played bishop f4, so the London system. So against London, the knight, so knight f6. They played knight f3. I then played bishop f5, so now very, very symmetrical. They played h3, and because I don't want to have to deal with a sort of immediate queenside push of the pawns with g4, I immediately played h5 just to shut that down. They played e3, which is good. I developed my other knight to c6. Opponent now pushes their knight to e5, fairly aggressive this point in the game. I knew that probably the best move is to capture. There will be a capture back, and there'll be some shuffling afterwards. But I actually thought here for about a minute and a half, and I thought, look, if they're playing aggressive, I should try to play aggressive just to see what happens. And so I decided to play knight to b4. And the logic here is that I'm sort of gunning up for an attack on the c2 pawn. If the knight goes there, then potentially it's a fork of the rook and king with checks. Obviously, that rook potentially will be lost. And so the opponent must respond here with knight to a3, defending the c2 pawn. However, that might not be the most obvious move if you're already thinking aggressively. And they miss it. So they played c3, and that's a blunder. So yes, it's a threat on the knight, but knights can jump over lines. That's one of the superpowers of knights. So straight to c2 with check. Chess.com thought it was a great move. They forced to move their king out of check, and now knight captures rook. Opponent now moves their knight out of the way to a3, obviously opening up for the queen to capture my knight. And so really this maneuver is really a trade of the rook for the knight. And I do have to be careful because rooks are often not felt in the early part of the game. They're usually tucked in the corner and they're not really participating much in the game, while the knight is a sort of an early aggressive piece. So I could, even though I may be materially ahead in the game, I could actually be put at a disadvantage. Though the opponent now has lost the rights to castling, and also moving out of the defense potential of some of their other pieces. So knight e4 with check. Opponent are now sort of forced to move their king a second time. And to try to avoid, the immediate capture of my knight, I now throw in some wild haymakers, create new threats. So I played g5, attack on the bishop. Now obviously that's defended by my knight, so the bishop would have to withdraw to h2, which makes a lot of sense. That this sort of does gum up these pieces here. So I'm happy with that. I'm quite happy with that. Now the next move here, I saw two possibilities. One, threat on that knight, but the knight could escape fairly easily there, I thought. And so I thought it might be a better move to play e6, opening up the diagonal for my dark square bishop with an attack on that knight. And so that's what I did, and I was really pleased to see in the analysis that was considered a brilliant move. And I actually had to analyze this a little bit to see exactly why it was so brilliant. And I think the reason why it is that this knight is definitely lost because of that move. And the rationale for that is obviously the opponent could just not move the knight, and then of course it's captured, and then with some damaging of the pawn structure. But if they try to escape, let's say they try to move that knight of the way, it doesn't really work. So firstly, if they just go back to b1, well, that means that my knight is no longer directly under attack by the opponent, by the opposing queen. And more than that, if once I move this knight out of the way, I can potentially evacuate that knight, because again it'll be defended by the bishop. No, obviously more than happy to trade a knight and bishop for a queen. So that doesn't work for the opponent. If they try to move to evacuate their knight to c2, that's even worse, because I could simply just capture. And given that that knight was otherwise dead anyway, I would be obviously more than happy to trade knights. So that doesn't work. Now, what if the opponent, now obviously that would not be intelligent, given that would be a straight out capture by a pawn. But what if the opponent went to b5? Well, that would immediately come under attack from a6, and again here the knight just has nowhere good to go. If it goes here, it'll be captured. If it goes here, it'll be captured. Knights can't capture their own pieces, so they're really just forced to go back to a3, and I was planning on capturing with that bishop all along anyway. So with the move to there we go. So with the move e6, yeah, it really does completely trap that knight. That knight is lost, while move f6, which might have been a more direct attack, that knight actually has escape squares. So opponent captures my knight, I capture back, they capture my bishop, and I thought that was probably good for me. And opponent's development is quite odd. The pawn structure is all over the place. I felt that I was definitely ahead here, and I was. I did short castles just to move the king out of the way, with the queen hanging around on the king's side with now a potential open b file. Opponent plays f3, which is a good move. Kicks out my knight, but that's fine. They lunge forward with g4 with an attack on the queen, and so I decided to just capture with the pawn. They capture back, and now I've got an opportunity to evacuate my bishop to h7. Stockfish preferred, bringing my bishop all the way into the territory of the enemy. I thought about that, but it just looked bad to me. It just looked like I would be potentially forced to move that a second time. So I thought it would be better to bring it all the way to h7. Now, given that this file also is potentially open, once that bishop moves out of the way, just having the bishop there just allows an extra bit of defense along that file. This queen, could potentially stare down these diagonals as well. And with the king over here, I thought it would be good to have the bishop in that location. Opponent now plays f4, which was not necessarily the best move. I defend with f6, also with a simultaneous attack on the opponent's knight. They retreat their knight, and this allows me to respond with knight e4. And so now having sort of an extra defender on that pawn, so there's a bit of tension there, but I have potentially 1, 2, 3 defenders, and the opponent only has 2 attackers. They captured anyway. That allowed me to capture back with the knight. So again, Stockfish didn't think that was the best move, but in this location, in this situation, I wanted to trade pieces. I thought that I was ahead, and if I could force trade piece trades, I thought it would be better for me. Our opponent brought their bishop forward, but that to me doesn't really make any sense, because I was always planning on capturing that knight. So I whack that knight, they capture back, which is fine. And with the bishop now in the same line as the king, there is now the opportunity for that bishop to be pinned. And so my plan here with e5 was that I was sure, given that the opponent has shown a sort of propensity of just engaging in pawn trades, I was fairly sure that they were probably going to capture. That would allow me to capture back. They cannot capture back with bishop, as the bishop would now be pinned against the king, meaning that that bishop will automatically be lost. So that's what I did, and that's what happened. And what I saw at this point, which I didn't see prior to this part of the game, was I had another very, very tricky tactic. I could bring bishop to e4. Now, so it can't be taken by king, given it'll be defended by the pawn. But now I skewer the king against the rook. King must move out of the way, and that will allow me to capture a straight out rook. Opponent obviously can capture my pawn afterwards, but I am absolutely more than happy to trade a pawn to capture a rook. So in this situation, I opted to not capture the rook, capture the bishop first with pawn, but to play bishop e4 with check, skewering the king, now capturing the opponent's rook. And at this point, I was very, very sure that I was doing very well. Opponent captures with bishop, which is a mistake. Would have been better for them to capture with queen, bring the queen to the party. Obviously, my king is quite exposed on this side, but more than that, the opponent has also opened up the F file for my rook, which allows rook now allows me to play rook F3 with check. King cannot capture because it's protected by bishop. The king, the king is basically forced to go to H2. Now allows me to play queen H4 with check, and also defending that bishop. King is pretty much forced to go to G1. Now, they could potentially have blocked, but that wouldn't make any sense. And at this point, I sort of looked at sort of how I would sort of play this bit of the endgame. I needed to potentially get rid of one of the bishops, I thought, or have the bishops not really protecting. So I need an extra attacker. So I brought the other rook to the party finally, the move. So finally the rook, the other rook gets a move. So rook to F8. And I was thinking this looked really, really good. If I captures, queen be forced to capture, given that would be with check, queen would be lost. So I think the opponent here made the only move that made sense to them, which was bishop to E2, ostensibly now having an extra defender on the F1 square, and also seemingly an attack on the rook. Actually, that only brings checkmate earlier. And I actually ended up seeing this line. I was pretty proud of this. So firstly, there is queen to F2 with check. Logically, the opponent must capture the bishop. So it only has, and that's pretty much their only choice. So captures bishop, and now this allows me to play rook H3 with check. They now have no choice but to block with that bishop, and then my next move, which can either be rook to H2 or queen to H2, either of those moves is checkmate. Now the opponent saw that this was a mate in one, and so actually resigned prior to me being able to make the move. But I was very happy with just how smooth this game went for me. So good game to the opponent. GG. Sometimes a game just works out. Ideas play out, and no errors or blunders occur. And a move that I did think was okay, serendipitously was even rated as brilliant. Today was a good day for chess for me, though it's important not to mistake luck with ability. I hope you enjoyed this video, and thanks for watching.